So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Balash Chuar. I work at DG Cities. You have probably heard a little bit of an introduction to SMLL and kind of partly as well to DG Cities, kind of from Trevor Dorling, who was kind of during the launch discussion. Next slide, please. DG Cities is a kind of an urban innovation company. We were born out of the Royal Borough of Greenwich, and we essentially work as a smart city arm of the borough. That means that we have worked on some kind of very exciting and smart city innovation and research projects, both in the Greenwich, but also have taken the learnings that we have kind of gathered through these projects and have been disseminating them in other areas within the UK, working with local authorities, but also kind of private property developers and a variety of different organizations who are interested in this sector. We always kind of try and make sure that we link the different sectors together, so definitely not to work in silos, and always kind of bring in a human element into projects. So whilst many of the technology projects usually focus mainly on the technology, we try to make sure that they are designed and implemented in a way that will be beneficial for individual citizens as well. Next, please. So why are we looking at connected and autonomous mobility, and kind of why have we started working on this autonomous vehicle testbed? I think the main kind of element in it is that we want to know what will happen and to be able to kind of become as kind of well informed in new technologies as possible. So one of the things that SMLL started out doing was to really bring technology innovation into the hearts of UK and into London. A lot of the technology which is being developed today kind of often comes from kind of different countries or comes from organizations which are really just focused on their profits and then and doing kind of their own development and then trying to roll out products. And what we have seen in DG Cities and kind of is to be able to do this in a very integrated way and do this kind of technology scale up and implementation of technologies into the real world. What you need to do is you need to kind of work from the ground up, always with people, but always with kind of a wide variety of stakeholders. What SMLL really brings together is a wide set of parties, but also it has created essentially a facility which will allow us to test the future autonomous mobility concept, both in kind of autonomous and connected vehicles, but also in services. And over the next couple of slides, I'll go through how we envisage doing that and kind of why we are very excited to have been part of this project and why we're excited to kind of keep working in this environment. Next, please. So one of the key things that kind of many are looking at in terms of kind of cities, local authorities, they're looking at what are the regulations, like are there any kind of national or regional or kind of local regulations currently focused on autonomous vehicles and new technologies. And to be able to kind of ride these and set blueprints up for all the cities in the UK, it's important to kind of test them. So the UK currently already has kind of CCAF code of practice towards autonomous vehicle kind of trialing and testing. There are some BSI standards on, say, cybersecurity or again on the development of autonomous vehicle kind of testing and trialing. But there are also kind of smaller, more local local implementation aspects of autonomous vehicles. The TfL, Transport for London, within its kind of mayor's transport strategy, but also within its kind of guidance notes, looks at how autonomous vehicles should be implemented and should be trialed in London. And then at the end of the line, a local authority will need to consider within their local implementation plan what they need to put in place. And I think what is very important here is that often the local authorities are the ones who will actually be implementing some of these kind of steps or interventions. We can start thinking about anything from kind of connectivity, like do autonomous vehicles need any type of connectivity to kind of function, all the way down to kind of very simple things as maintenance of road layout or maintenance of actual road paintings that autonomous vehicles might be using. And it's also not always only autonomous vehicles, but many of the technologies which are currently being rolled out in kind of everyone's cars today, like autonomous braking or autonomous kind of following of other vehicles. All of that is dependent on a sort of almost a good environment for these vehicles. Obviously, the easier it is for a vehicle to recognize its environment, to read the traffic signs, to identify where other vehicles are, to not get too much reflection off from the roads, to actually see, where there is a double yellow line, or if it's a line where you can actually, overtake vehicles. All of that is very important, and all the kind of the testing and research that we are able to do at a city level at SMLL will actually help develop this guidance, and also help the UK be able to kind of take all the benefits from those vehicles. And why it's important that we are developing this together with kind of the technology players is that they can start taking into consideration how a city actually functions today, what are its limitations, what are its boundaries, so that they develop technologies which actually adapt to that. Next one, please. Infrastructure. So I try to not put up any sexy pictures of infrastructure, but what often is the most kind of important element in terms of especially connectivity, which is fiber. So that top picture, that's kind of how fiber looks like on the ground. We built over 20 kilometers of our private fiber network within SMLL, which allows us to kind of connect all the monitoring infrastructure within the testbed and kind of bring it all together. What this fiber also allows us to do is to trial additional connectivity infrastructure. So for instance, V2X technologies, kind of 4G, 5G mobile technologies, and anything else in the future. So if we imagine use cases where, for instance, somebody's standing behind a kind of a corner where a vehicle wouldn't be able to see it, and a human wouldn't be able to see it, but the traffic lights notice, the camera on a light notices that there is a person there. They could send that information to the vehicle so that the vehicles can react to that. All of that will require kind of a basic fiber backbone infrastructure. So what is very important for us to research within SMLL is what are the different kind of infrastructure elements, infrastructure pieces that cities of the future will have to have a really efficient transport network. Another thing that we have been looking at have been kind of drop-off and pick-up locations. Kind of with the rise of different mobility services, you don't park your car anymore. You kind of get dropped off by your Uber or taxi, kind of where you're going. If we imagine that this is going to be scaled up even further and even fewer people will own vehicles, at least in kind of city centers, we will need to be able to manage that. So how do you do that? One of the things that we are able to test within SMLL is that we can kind of compare how people use taxi ranks or how people use kind of bus stops by kind of having footage of them and analyzing that footage, obviously anonymously, and kind of see what are the kind of the basic requirements of people in a changing world at different stops, and kind of try and test kind of the same concept for autonomous vehicles as well. if you have a luggage, like how do you put that in a vehicle without a driver? Or if you potentially have any mobility disabilities, like how can you get into vehicles without anybody helping you? All of that will need to be considered where kind of future drop-off pickup locations are planned across our cities. And to be able to do that at scale, currently you can really do that within SMLL. Next slide, please. And then kind of finally, we also would like to be able to test not only vehicles and not only test whether kind of individual vehicles are able to move safely across the city, but also to see how kind of the future of services will actually happen. So what we would like to see is kind of tests going ahead within the Smart Mobility Living Lab, where kind of the technology providers work together with kind of public sector organizations to identify what are the key kind of connectivity, kind of mobility needs within a city. Say it could be kind of transporting of certain groups of people to hospitals, or moving people from a residential neighborhood to an area where jobs are located, and to do that efficiently. And we would like to be able to test those. So there are SMLL has a number of autonomous vehicles which we are able to start using for that, but we are also kind of building up trials and trials of services to actually mimic how the future will look like, so that a lot of the kind of the trial and error in scaling up a service could already be tested beforehand. And again, what we are kind of providing for that is kind of very high-tech camera analysis of a wide range of different road structures or different kind of curbside locations where vehicles will be interacting with citizens. Next slide, please. So yeah, essentially, kind of SMLL, as you would have seen from the previous presentation as well, has over 200 locations where it's able to kind of gather and collect data of mobility, of transport, of the current transport, and then look at changes as well if we implement or kind of overlay new transport services or kind of new transport technologies on it. It could be kind of by upgrading infrastructure, or it could be by adding a new service. And I think what we are really kind of have done here is that because we have a kind of a wide range of different environments, we are able to actually mimic many or all type of local authorities, cities within the UK. So if somebody's kind of looking at, testing for their city or for their development, like what should be the new kind of mobility service that we should need in the next, 50, 100 years, or how will the city look like in the next, 30 years? How can I start planning for that? And then you would need to kind of do quite a lot of research and kind of trial and error and kind of testing the market to really understand what it's going to look like. At SMLL, we probably have already thought about it. We probably have kind of some of the partners who are doing research in that place, and those partners are probably developing their technologies, kind of using our testbed. So I think what is really ideal is to kind of try and bring some of those kind of really important questions that authorities, developers have, and kind of try and develop them together with SMLL, and kind of also benefit from the different partnerships which are available, kind of different sectors which are being represented, to also come up with kind of combined solutions. So you might need a specific mobility service in a city because you have a certain area, or you have a new area which needs a better connection and a better integration with the existing transport system. That might need just a mobility service provider who can deliver it. But most likely you will need an energy company who can help you with that, because you will probably want electricity fueled vehicles. You'll probably need a connectivity provider because you will probably need or want this network to work very fluidly with all the customers. You'll probably want to rethink your infrastructure because you might be able to add new elements into your infrastructure which can actually make it more efficient or make it more optimized. So it really is kind of transport has always probably been, but it's becoming an even more kind of integrated and kind of multifaceted sector. And what we are doing at SMLL is kind of bringing all these players together to develop a common kind of offerings. I think we can go to the next slide, but I think this was the last one for me. Thank you very much, and we'd be very happy to kind of answer your questions after Laura's presentation. Yes, I can't hear you. Do you want to just log back on again? Apologies for this. It was working before. Maybe I'll answer a couple of questions just in the meantime, if you had any. There's one question about TFL, but I'll leave that to Laura. Do you happen, if you had any other questions, please just put them in the chat, into the chat. There's a question about rollout. So the SMLL has already kind of been implemented, and it's already in place. So over the coming kind of months and years, it will be possible for kind of players to be testing there. Yeah, I think we can hear you now.
Perfect. Apologies for that. It worked seamlessly earlier, didn't it? And then just as we were about to come on, it decided not to. Great. Let me get my screens ready, and yeah, I'll go through my section of the presentation. Thanks a lot, Balázs. So my name is Laura Poulton. I'm the Insight and Business Analysis Manager at Transport for London, which is part of the Transport and Innovation Directorate. You heard from Michael Hurwitz earlier, who is our Director. We've been leading on the involvement that TfL had in the SMLL part build project. So that's the facility you've just been introduced to you. But I wanted to talk a little bit more generally about TfL and give you a bit of an insight into our approach to future mobility and connected autonomous mobility more specifically. So the Innovation Directorate was set up about 4 years ago to respond to new technologies and business models. And we work across TfL to ensure that policy, regulation, operational frameworks, etc., are ready for the future. So we're not interested in quirky gadgets. What we're interested in is services and technology that could have a positive change for London. So how are we approaching future mobility? We're looking right across the range of different future mobility services, such as those you can see on the screen there. And we've also got a commercial innovation team that works particularly with SMEs in order to make it easier for them to work with Transport for London. So while I'm here to talk to you specifically about London, I think it's important to recognise the global context within which we're working. So there's huge change being driven in transportation, and that's due to the fact that there's more data available, customers' expectations are changing, people want to ensure that they can move around in different ways. This is a problem, but it's also an opportunity for us, but we're keen to make sure that the right regulation is in place, and that's predominantly to ensure the safety of Londoners and those using our network. And we do take this disruption seriously, in that they were spending time and effort looking into this, because the amount of money that's going into future mobility investments is significant. We recognise that London will always be an attractive proposition for new mobility services and models, and it's not always easy from the outset to understand who the winners might be. So London is a complex environment from a political perspective, from a geographical perspective, environmentally, as well as some of the objectives we've set for ourselves, around 80% of travel to be active and sustainable. And on top of that, we've obviously had COVID come and complicate matters even further. But what our team does is working to balance the national commitments with the local or mayoral view. We've also got to take into account that we've got 32 plus City of London in terms of borough representation and interests. We're one of the oldest cities in the world, so we've got the infrastructure that comes from that. So while we do have a particularly complex environment, what I think we're lucky to have are very clear priorities, some of which have been explained to you previously by Michael and the other panelists there. So those of you who know London, it'll be no surprise to know that I'm going to talk to you about the MTS, the Mayor's Transport Strategy, which sets out that we are a city open to innovation, but it needs to happen in the right way. So we've got targets around Vision Zero, where by 2041, no one should be killed or seriously injured on our transport network. We want a zero emissions public transport network. As I mentioned before, 80% of active or sustainable travel trips to be taken. So when it comes to any future mobility product or service, including CAM, we're going to like it if it allows us to get information, sharing knowledge and data. If it's going to complement public transport, again, that's something that's going to interest us. And if it opens travel for all, then it's something that we're going to be particularly keen on. So hopefully that helps if you are thinking of coming to London in terms of looking at future mobility. So then just to go into a little bit more detail about our three-stage approach to ensuring that what we do in terms of innovation supports city goals. So we've got a three-stage approach. We want to engage with the market, whether that's academics, SMEs, OEMs, etc., to ensure that we can learn and be informed about what's happening in the market. We then take a look at what the product or service might offer in terms of our own priorities, and then we look to deliver on a proposed action that we come up with, whether that's changing policy or regulation, getting involved in trials, or continuing to observe the situation. And there's a couple of examples up on the slide there of the demand responsive bus trials that we took part in, and we did some work also on dockless bikes with the boroughs. So you might ask, why are we engaged with connected and autonomous mobility? Again, there's three reasons for this. Transport for London has got a duty to manage the TLRN so that traffic can move as freely as possible. We license and provide permits for passenger services, as well as the fact that in the MTS, in the Mayor's Transport Strategy, there were two specific proposals linked to connected autonomous vehicles. The first of which was saying that we'd take part in the trials of new technology, adopting a safety first approach, and think about how this new technology could be used to support healthy streets. The second of which was talking about ensuring an appropriate mix of policy and regulation, and to make sure that connected autonomous vehicles develop and are used in a way that meet the objectives that we have. So a little bit more detail on the approach that we're taking in the Transport and Innovation Directorate, and working with colleagues across TfL to implement. So research and development is key. We're involved in trials such as the Smart Mobility Living Lab. We're also involved in advising or monitoring feasibility studies. And for some trials, we decide to take an advisory board role rather than be directly involved as a partner. Through the learning that we get from these, we can then ensure that the policy that's developed around connected autonomous vehicles aligns with the mayor's transport strategy, but it also helps us when we're responding to government and working with CCAB, for example, and the DFT on how policy nationally should evolve to make sure it meets the needs of Londoners, and also, of course, the evolution of our own policies and regulation. So part of this as well is stakeholder engagement that's externally at a local and a national level, as well as internally across the different teams within TfL that might be affected, either in the because of forthcoming trials or because of the longer term developments around connected autonomous mobility and future mobility more generally. So I just wanted to give you some examples of the trials that we've been involved in. Smart Mobility Living Lab is an obvious one. It was happening in London. It offered some really key learning opportunities for us to engage with, which is why we got involved. We're involved in 2 on-road trials, one called Streetwise, which was led by 5AI, and one called Driven that was led by Oxbotica. But we've also been involved in projects such as De-risk and Shift, which are more focused on the modelling and simulation side of things. So what I wanted to do before I finished is talk to you a little bit about some relevant publications that we published last year in July 2019, apologies. So the first one I wanted to talk to you about was our CAV statement, and if you're interested in finding out more about this, then just Google TfL and CAVs, and you'll see the links to this document and the document I'm going to talk about next. So the CAV statement sets at a high level that we know we need to be operationally ready for trials, and it also talks about what we might consider in terms of longer term policy development. Then the second document that it's worth taking a look at is the guidance for London trials. So this should be read in conjunction with the DFT's National Code of Practice, but because of some of the complexities of London that I've outlined earlier, we felt London needed a tailored approach. So we published the first of its kind guidance for trials in London. It is an evolving document, and safety obviously underpins everything that we want to see happening in London. But one of the key takeaways I wanted to ensure you were aware of today is if you are thinking of coming to London to trial, whether it's with SMLL or elsewhere, please come and talk to us, engage with us, talk to us about what you might be doing and where, and we can then take it from there. So what's next? Well, unfortunately, I haven't got a crystal ball, and it's probably safe to say no one really knows what's going to happen next. But one thing we are sure of, as was discussed in the panel earlier, we expect to see more trials of future mobility and CAM in particular in London. We expect the complexity of those trials to increase, as well as a push for more connectivity in the London environment. But it's just key to remember what we're looking at from a TfL point of view is what's going to work for London, what fits with our objectives, and what's of benefit to Londoners in the future. So there are some challenges, but given our approach to things, I think we're in a good place to face them. So if you do want to talk to us about anything, please feel free to get in touch. And we can stop now for some questions.
Thank you. If you had any questions, can please just pop them into the chat. I think there is one from kind of previously as well, around kind of what the ability and interest of local authorities is towards evaluating kind of these technologies. I might kind of I'll start starting, and kind of Laura, please jump in. What we have kind of seen is that it's very mixed within the UK. So certain local authorities are very aware of autonomous mobility and kind of the kind of whole concept of kind of future mobility. They are kind of actively taking place in trials. they actively encourage technology companies to kind of work with them and really trying to help. This is kind of on one end. On the other end, there are some organizations who have not necessarily been kind of exposed to this sort of this concept yet, or they have really not tried to implement them into their kind of local implementation plans or kind of local transport strategies. So I think there is a kind of a very big gap as well, probably between the two. And what we are trying to do is kind of help to develop kind of blueprints or frameworks that could actually help some of these organizations and some of these local authorities kind of to become better at it. And I think kind of the main reason why it's important, even before autonomous vehicles are kind of everywhere, is because a lot of the kind of infrastructure or development investments that happen today, they're not only for today, they are for the next, decades. So if you are putting something in place today, which will not be kind of the most optimal or most efficient way to do things in about 5 years' time or 10 years' time, then it's really almost kind of a waste of money because you will need to change it anyway. Whilst we already have kind of good data around some interventions which would need to take place or which should be done in specific certain ways already.
Yeah, and I can take the question that's just come through in terms of TfL's remit for CAV trials. Does it apply to TfL red routes only, or does it apply to borough roads as well? So what we're interested in is working with boroughs so that they can see the advantages of potentially connected autonomous vehicles in their areas. So what we would advise is if you are thinking of coming to London generally, then talk to us, and then we can put you in contact and work with you in terms of engaging with those boroughs and seeing whether what you're proposing works in that particular area.
I think there are a couple of other questions with TfL in it.
There are, and we've run over time as well. I was conscious that we wanted to finish by 5 o'clock, so people want to go, but okay, let's go for another one. So the question, Kenneth, on SMEs. So what I'd advise you to do is to Google TfL and innovation, and it should take you to our innovation portal page where you can log your interest in working with TfL. And what we do is then have a database of all of those SMEs and innovators that might be interested in particular areas. So when challenges such as Freight Lab or Road Lab come out, we can contact you. So please go on and sign up on the innovation portal to the innovator database, and it should be some more information there for you. And then Stuart had another question around published numbers used when valuing social and environmental impacts alongside the financial value. It's a good question, Stuart. I'll take a look, and if you want to drop me an email with that question, I can see what I can do for you. And Kenneth, yep, Simon's answered your question for you. He's put the link to the innovation portal up there. Thanks a lot, Simon.
Are there any other questions? I'm not sure whether we shared our email, so I might kind of pop my email into the chat as well if anybody has any questions kind of privately. I think that, Laura, there's a question around cabs in outer or inner London or everywhere.
Yeah, I think as we've set out in the MTS, we're still in the sort of learning and exploring stage as to where connected autonomous vehicles could be most suitable. So it's probably safe to say we're not ruling out any areas at the moment, but there's still quite a lot of time to be taken in terms of the learning that we need to do to be able to answer that question in more detail. I think that's just a matter of time, Mark.
And I think from our side, it's always kind of in terms of kind of how we are thinking about it and kind of how we are trying to work with SMLL and kind of other parties around it as well, is to make sure that there is a kind of a good use case and try and develop the kind of the use case first. And by use case, I mean kind of a specific kind of environment in which current transport modes are not meeting a demand. And then there try and see whether kind of autonomous technologies or connected technologies can actually do that or kind of do that better. And kind of we try and focus on it in that specific way.
Yeah, I think that's very valid, Balázs, to think about what the use case and what the solution is that they could bring to London and to specific areas. Absolutely.
Thank you. If there are probably no further questions, then thank you very much, everyone, and hope you enjoyed kind of today's event. And feel free to get in touch with us or with SMLL directly if you have any further questions or thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thanks, Balázs.